Is Revelation the scariest book of the Bible? That's what we're going to talk about today. Hi, this is Jill from the North Woods talking about the Bible one small step at a time. Revelation has a reputation, and for a lot of people, it's the scariest book in the Bible or the one that they skip because it feels like a code they're not equipped to read. And neither really has to be true. The reason I'm doing this podcast is because starting in a few weeks, the Bible in Small Steps is going to talk about the book of Revelation. In this coming up, we're going to talk about who wrote it and why they wrote it. But I wanted to do this initial piece to help people, if they're reading along, understand exactly how to understand it a little bit better without feeling a lot of pressure. Revelation was written to real churches facing real pressure in the first century. But it's a pastoral letter before it's an apocalyptic level, of it. Underneath all this imagery is a letter that's meant to comfort and steady people who were scared and discouraged. It's still the job today. So here's the posture that I'm going to bring into this series, that if you're going to try to read the book of Revelation, it is not something to be solved. You should be comforted by it, steadied by it. I don't know a lot of people who feel that way, and that's why I thought this was an important message to say. The same way that the very first readers were. So you hear a lot of terms that if you've ever seen people talk about the book of Revelation elsewhere, and so it's kind of worth knowing them before we're going into it. Preterist. It's essentially the idea that the book of Revelation is already fulfilled in the first century, Rome's persecution of the early church, okay? And then there's the futurist who sees the book entirely all ahead of us, future tribulation, a future Antichrist, the end times yet to come. The historicist who sees the book as symbolic of an outline of church history, era by era, from John's time until the end. And then there's the idealist who sees the book as a picture of ongoing conflict between Christ and evil, true in every age and not tied to a specific event. Okay, so there's different ways of looking at it, and a lot of that has to do, too, with your denomination, that we know what they teach. And so we're not going to really pick one and discard the rest, and here's why. We're kind of going to go with a yes-to-all approach in it. I think about when Jesus talked about the destruction of the temple in his ministry. If you remember back when we were doing the Gospels, people would ask him or, wonder about it. Is he talking about the Jerusalem destruction in 70 AD, or is he talking about the end of the world? And the honest answer I got to when reading it is the answer is yes, all of it. That's how God's view of time works. He sees the before, he sees the now, and he sees the after all at once. A single image in Revelation can genuinely be true of the first century, true again throughout the history of the church, and also true in the end in its final form, without contradicting itself. I think about the birth pangs. Jesus talked a lot about the birth pangs. Labor is not one isolated event. It's waves of pain and then easing, and then pain and then easing, building intensity, all moving towards this final delivery. It's not an accident. Jesus used this analogy often. Every collapse of a godless power across history is a contraction. Every time real evil grows, it's a birth pang. And the end is still the same. There's a birth. There's some labor that goes all the way through, and it's not separated. It's not unrelated. Each of these waves is building up to the eventual birth. And the other part of it, too, is you don't have to choose who is the Antichrist. I know that there are a lot of people who like to say, oh, it's this person or it's that person. It's true of all of history. Some people thought it was Hitler and some people thought it was Napoleon. Or there were people who said this is about Rome or this is about something yet to come, And the idea that I want to put out there is that you don't have to pick. There's no reason you have to pick anything. When we look at the scales of all of this, we don't have to pick an era. It can be all the eras. The time of Christ or the time of John, the history of the church, and then the time after. All of it can be true. But then the other thing is like I said, we're not going to be naming names. Throughout history, people have confidently pointed to emperors, popes, kings, dictators, modern public figures, and said, you know what? That's the Antichrist. And every single one of those answers have aged badly. The problem with naming names is it's almost like pinning a photo of a criminal investigation on the wall before you have any evidence of it. Once the face is on the wall, you can't stop looking at that pattern. You will keep checking everyone against that one photo. Real evidence usually points somewhere else that gets ignored, but because now we have a photo, we can't get our minds around it. We start to draw conclusions instead of actually having an investigation, looking for evidence to guide it. So we're not going to be naming any names, modern figures, leaders, who we think the Antichrist is or is not, because the subject is trading real vigilance, real study with a false sense of security. If we think X, Y, and Z is the Antichrist, we're not going to keep looking around. We're not going to, we could be fooled. We could be looking in the wrong direction. And so the question we'll keep asking is not who is this, but instead we're going to ask the question, what does Scripture say the opposition of Christ actually looks like? John gives us real checkpoints, the opposition to Christ, false teachings, deceptions, denial of truth about Jesus. Those are things to watch for in any era, including our own, and it's not a face on a poster. So let's talk about a quick guide of the vivid imagery that you will see in this book as we're about to read it. So there's roughly some imageries, some real big ones here, and it lands in Scripture intended rather than a horror movie imagery. Just to give you a background, when I was a kid and an atheist, I watched a movie that was based on a book called The Late Great Planet Earth, and it was, I think, about the book of Revelation, and I don't think I slept for a month. It's not meant to scare little children, right? It's supposed to instead not be horror movie imagery, but give us hope, like I said. So there are seals, trumpets, bowls that are not three separate timelines of events happening one after the other. It's more like the same basic conflict that's being retold, different angles each time with the volume turned up. Expect repetition in the escalation. Birth pangs, right? They get worse and worse and worse as you get closer to it. Not a strict sequence of events. Numbers in the book of Revelation are vocabulary, not math problems, meaning 7 means completeness. We saw that when we were looking at the genealogy of Jesus, right? There was 7 generations, 7 people and 7 generations, and so that is complete, right? And so Jesus is the final complete. 12 means God's people. 1,000 means a total period of time, not a literal year count. So when we say, it's like us saying, oh, that took forever. That took 1,000 years. And I think that's the gist of it. People will try to pin particular years to it. In fact, I was thinking about this. We are coming up in 2033 in April of the death of Jesus. It's going to be the 2000th anniversary of the death of Jesus. And I thought, well, there's a nice round number. Nope, we're not going to do that, right? 1,000 years just literally means a long time. And Revelation's numbers work that same way. Then there's these beasts that represent worldly powers and deceptive ideologies that work together against God's people, a partnership that has shown up again and again throughout history, not one specific government leader or specific country. So there's going to be this conversation about 2 women. That's a deliberate contrast. One represents God's faithful people, and the other represents the worldly powers dressed up in glamour and seduction. Reading them side by side to make it clear these are comparisons. Then there's this idea of the dragon. It's one image in the text that defines, Scripture defines outright. It tells us plainly that the dragon is Satan. Notice that when the Bible wants something to be solved for us, it just tells us it. It doesn't lay it out there hoping for some, I don't know, wise person to sort of just figure it out. The dragon is the devil. Everything else is left to be more open, meaning to watch the pattern, Don't try to solve it like it's a riddle. The worship scenes interrupt the action throughout the book. If a sequence starts to feel overwhelming or frightening, the next is a worship scene meant to reset your perspective, and that's by design. So when you're looking at this, we already know how this book ends. Jesus reigns, his people are secure, the Lamb ultimately triumphs. Every strange image, every plague, every beast is meant to be read forward from that ending, not as a mystery to the whole outcome. You don't have to worry about the outcome. We know how that is. So if you're listening to the book of Revelation as we go through it, and that's going to be a hoot. I have to tell you, when I started this idea, I thought this is going to be the scariest thing I ever do is talking about the book of Revelation. But it's going to be okay. So don't try to solve it. Let it steady you. Its first job was to settle you, and it still is today. Look for patterns, oppositions to Christ, so you know when you see opposition. Don't look for a face or a name. Don't make a wanted poster for the Antichrist. When the imagery escalates, expect worship to follow next. That's your reset button. Hold the numbers loosely as vocabulary and not numbers. We're not doing math here. And remember that everything, while you're in the middle of this, in the end, the Lamb wins. Everything else is just details. That's the lens that we're going to bring to one of the most interesting chapters that we're ever going to read in this podcast. And we're going to do it small steps at a time for a really misunderstood book of the Bible, one that scared me when I was a kid. All right, everyone, thanks so much. Appreciate you being out there. If you have questions, comments, you can email me at jill@startwithsmallsteps.com, or you can look at my website, jillfromthenorthwoods.com. Look for the coming weeks as we start the book of Revelation in the Bible in Small Steps podcast.